Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program this evening, a global spotlight as tensions simmer on multiple fronts. We turn to the high-stakes chess game of international relations being played out with Donald Trump's recent meeting with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. That's been hailed by the White House as a 12-on-10 triumph. But is it truly a breakthrough or just a fragile truce amidst escalating US China frictions? Our expert guest, geopolitical analyst Ian Bremmer, joins us in a moment to dissect this. But let's briefly discuss what it is that we are bringing up on the program first. We'll be looking at Trump's threats to resume US nuclear testing. How credible are these? What perils do they unleash on global non-proliferation? If America does proceed, what potentially fiery retort might Russia unleash, especially with Putin's Ukraine rhetoric fueling a potential new arms race? We'll also probe the US double standard on oil imports. Why the harsh scrutiny on India's Russian purchases while China's massive inflows get a clear pass? We'll also talk about West Asia with Israeli strikes reigniting Gaza. What role could superpowers, including China, play in fanning or dousing the flames at this stage? Plus, the meeting between Xi and Trump and the surprise deal over there, China easing rare earth exports for a year in exchange potentially for US chip access leniency. Does this expose vulnerabilities in supply chains? Is it a real thaw or a tactical timeout in this tech war? Ian, thank you very much for being with us. First up, let's talk a little bit about the threat of nuclear testing. It's happened more than 30 years back as far as America is concerned. Are we to take Donald Trump's threats to resume nuclear testing reliably?
So what he said was that the United States was going to take reciprocal measures on the basis of the Russian tests. As you know, the Russians aren't testing nuclear weapons. What they've done is tested a cruise missile that's nuclear powered. And so if the United States in return wants to start testing the delivery mechanisms, for example, for nukes, that would be a much less provocative move and wouldn't require any further escalation. Frequently there's very little specificity around what Trump says because he's not really thinking about it, and he's putting something out there without his advisors, sort of giving him adequate context. So I don't think there's very much to see here yet. And of course, the fact that Trump said this right before his meeting with Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping completely ignored it, which was exactly the appropriate thing to do, absent any useful knowledge.
How would Russia potentially respond to American nuclear tests if indeed Trump went ahead?
Well, as I said, I don't see any reason to believe that Trump is going to go ahead. If there were a nuclear test, then it would lead to nuclear tests from Russia and probably from China as well. And the world doesn't want to see that. There is a nuclear test ban treaty that the Americans signed, though it wasn't fully ratified, back in '96. And I guess there haven't been any actual nuclear tests by the U.S. since something like '93. So it's not something anyone wants to see. By the way, you probably know the American government is shut down right now.
Yeah.
And part of the furlough are the officials from the nuclear program that would need to supervise and execute on a test. So you couldn't have a test right now, even if you wanted to, because the government shut down.
Is there any need for a nuclear test, given the fact that America is now in a position, as are most of the Western nuclear powers or the major nuclear powers, they're all in a position to lab test nuclear weapons? So
that's right.
It just seems old Cold War rhetoric. Given the technology and its evolution, it's not really necessary, is it?
Correct.
And therefore, would you agree that this is just Trump's bluster? We shouldn't take it too seriously?
I don't think that Trump has a great deal of policy knowledge or detail when he makes a statement like that. I understand that everyone in the media rushes to cover every single breathless word. But even if we take the words directly, literally, they are contradictory. They are not internally wholly aligned with each other. There are also factual mistakes in terms of the size of the American arsenal compared to that of Russia. So I think this is a good one to take a breath on or two and wait until there's something more meaningful to say.
We'll talk at length in a moment about President Xi's meeting with Trump and trade issues. But before that, Ukraine and the fact that the war continues. Do you, post this meeting between Trump and Xi, potentially see China having some sort of a role in ending the Ukraine conflict from here onwards?
Trump has suggested that both in the last several days in the run-up to the Xi meeting, as well as over the past months. He's brought it up several times. Xi Jinping hasn't really bid on it. There weren't any talking points from the Chinese on Russia, Ukraine. I was in China myself a week and a half ago. I met with a lot of the Chinese leadership, and they made clear to me that at a time when the United States is seen as considerably less reliable by its allies and partners, including India, that the Chinese don't have many strategic allies, but the ones that they have, they think it's extremely important not to act in an unpredictable way, not to throw them under the bus, not to contradict previous agreements. So the Chinese are particularly reluctant to be seen as changing their relationship with Russia on the basis of U.S. pressure. So I think that there's extremely little willingness on the part of the Chinese to force the Russians to come to a ceasefire or to come to a negotiated settlement with the Ukrainians if the Russians are unwilling to do so. It's certainly true that China would like the war to end, but I don't believe that they are prepared to use any significant leverage in terms of their relationship with Putin to bring that about.
Ian, was the Xi-Trump meeting genuinely 12 on 10, as Trump says it was?
I don't know what 12 out of 10 is. My understanding, and look, I'm not a mathematician, I'm a political scientist, but when I was taught numbers, 1 to 10 meant that 10 was the best number you could get. So, I mean, maybe it's changed since then.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Maybe it has, and we'll all have to relearn mathematics. But did America really get anything out of this, which is very substantive?
Yes. Yes, they did. I mean, I would probably grade the meeting as a 7 out of 10 in the context of where the relationship is today compared to where the relationship was before the meeting. Now, if we were not to grade on a scale and look at where the relationship is today compared to where it was when Trump took office, which is the more meaningful metric, the relationship is worse. So it was a good meeting. It was an important meeting. I'm glad it happened. But much of what the meeting accomplished was to undo or to suspend damage in the relationship that had been done by Trump and by the Chinese in response to Trump. So we saw basically the U.S. has significantly increased tariffs against China. China has increased them against the U.S. The U.S. has now suspended most of that, with the exception of 10% from fentanyl. The chemicals that are coming into the U.S. that Trump levied, and the Chinese as well. So we have a suspension for 1 year of that trade war, which had become a boycott under Trump. We also have a suspension of the American 50% rule that had been announced in October that was going to put thousands of Chinese companies under a sanctions regime. And in return, we have the Chinese suspending the 9 critical minerals and related licensing restrictions that they had put on the table in response to the American 50% rule. We have the Chinese agreeing to buy soybeans once again, as they had been buying them at the beginning of the Trump administration, but then they suspended it. So, I mean, if you think of the letter V, and the relationship had been here, and then Trump comes into office and it goes down to here, we're now mostly back to here again.
All right.
But the broader relationship is still worse than it was back in January.
Can China be a reliable exporter of rare earths to the United States and other nations? Is that a real hold that it has geostrategically? If they cut off supplies, and it's just a one-year interim agreement or arrangement they potentially have with America, it is a huge power play that they can adopt, right?
The Russian playwright Chekhov once wrote that if you see a loaded gun in the first act of a play, it's going to go off by the end. And what we've now seen from China is a global lockhold on critical minerals and rare earths, the exploitation, the supply chain, the processing. And China has shown that not only do they have that leverage, but they have the regulatory capability of leveraging it. Now, a one-year suspension, and I accept the Chinese at their word on maintaining that at this point, because both sides have leverage. That 1 year will provide the United States and its allies the ability to reduce their vulnerability to the Chinese chokehold. And some companies will change their technology to rely less on those minerals. And the Americans will invest a lot more domestically and with allies to have alternative sources. And for critical minerals, that will matter a lot. But for rare earths, particularly heavy rare earths, we're probably talking about 5 to 10 years before the Americans could effectively replace it, which means that you're going to have yet again a very important run-up with uncertainty and instability, unless over the course of the now 2 planned Xi Jinping Trump meetings in the next year, one planned for April in the US, one in China, one planned in the United States later in the year, those meetings create an opportunity for a more comprehensive trade deal that could potentially resolve the rare earth problem for a longer period of time, perhaps essentially permanently. But that's not where we are right now. And so, no, for now, the result of yesterday's meeting, only a 90-minute meeting, 45 minutes if you take out the simultaneous, the translation, that meeting really did not resolve this issue at all.
I find it interesting that, after certain promises, and this was something which India's External Affairs Ministry confirmed yesterday, China is beginning talks to step up exports of rare earths to India. India obviously needs the same rare earths for various applications. How would you assess that, the fact that there is a greater willingness of China to engage with India on something as precious as rare earths?
Well, the fact that the United States had ignored this capability of China for decades, and now it is a top priority. And it's a top priority not just for the United States by itself, and you hear the Americans frequently say that America first does not mean America alone, though occasionally it feels that way if you're on the receiving end. Here we have Marco Rubio and others in the White House saying explicitly that they know that they need to coordinate with American allies to build resilience and alternatives to that Chinese supply chain. And they've had some success You've seen the announcements from Japan, from South Korea, from Australia, and the investments they want to make. You've seen increasingly alignment with the UK and Europe too. And so here, the Chinese see that India is a country they would much rather not have be a part of that US-led coordination to try to contain and compete with the Chinese. Also, China and India have been engaged in their own efforts to stabilize the relationship that have started before the Trump administration came back, but they've certainly stepped up and accelerated as we saw when Prime Minister Modi went to China just a couple months ago.
Will China be allowed reliable access to high-tech AI chips from companies like NVIDIA in America?
I accept that that will be the case. I don't know if that's just going to be the H20 or if that will be even more advanced chips. But certainly NVIDIA, which is now a $5 trillion market cap company with a lot of access to President Trump, has been lobbying Trump personally and directly and willing to spend a lot of money on the U.S. government and on Trump's preferences if they are allowed to continue those sales. So I do expect, I mean, he's transactional. He listens to the leaders, the corporate leaders that are willing to pay, and NVIDIA is certainly in a particularly strong position on that front.
Well, we're running short on time. Just one or two more questions. Firstly, Israel's renewed aggression in Gaza, and the sense and the hope that so many around the world had that, with the return of the hostages and the swap for prisoners, the Gaza conflict, the beginning of the end appeared visible. That may not necessarily be the case. So if you were asked, why has the Gaza conflict still not ended, what would you say?
I think the end of the beginning is visible, but not the beginning of the end. The living hostages have all been returned. Even the Israeli government didn't think that was possible. It's a big deal. And the Israeli occupation has now been pulled back to roughly 50% of Gaza. So the war is no longer taking place the way it had been for 2 years. That's the end of the beginning. The beginning of the end would be a disarmament of Hamas, the removal of Hamas from leadership in Gaza, and the removal of Israeli troops from Gaza that would allow for reconstruction and some type of Palestinian governance with oversight and security from the international community, but not from Israel. That we're not at that latter point. The Hamas has not yet turned over the remains of the dead hostages. That was part of their agreement. There is no timeline or mechanism for Hamas to disarm. That was part of the agreement, but there's no agreement on what that means from Hamas leaders and from Israel. And there's no willingness on the part of Israel to fully withdraw. And as that occurs, we see sporadic fighting. We see more bombing from Israel. We see a lot of people getting killed. And then Israel continuing to say, well, the ceasefire is still in place, with a lot of pressure from American senior officials who have been cycling through Jerusalem to make sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu continues to listen. So I think that's where we are right now.
Just a final question or two. Every couple of days, Donald Trump talks about how he ended the mini war between India and Pakistan between the 7th and 10th of May. Everybody over here says nothing of the sort happened. It was Pakistan that came to the ceasefire table. I've personally been to briefings where there was a conversation between the US, where we were told about a conversation between the US President J.D. Vance and Prime Minister Modi and the top leadership over here. But it wasn't a threat. It was a suggestion that, look, perhaps you need to end it. But Trump's repeated statements suggesting that there would have been 250% sanctions on both nations, and that's why he brought that mini war to an end. To many over here, it's just astounding because they don't really see it as having happened at all. This isn't one person I've spoken to about 6.
So when you say over here, just for your audience, I want to make it clear you're not talking about South Asia, you're talking about India.
Yeah.
Because of course, the Pakistani government has very much said that Trump and Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance were involved in helping bring the war to an end, and indeed should receive perhaps a peace prize for that role. So India and Pakistan, not only are they fighting and mistrust each other, but they also have different perspectives on this. My perspective is that the United States played a role, but not the only role, that there was more influence over Pakistan than over India around what a ceasefire would look like in the terms. But then Trump embarrassed Prime Minister Modi by announcing a ceasefire while the Indian government was still working on what the statement was going to look like. And if you're the Prime Minister of India with your conflict with Pakistan and the Americans suddenly announce it, you're going to take exception to that. So I think the truth is somewhere in between. And it's unfortunate that everyone's arguing over something that frankly should not be argued about. The important thing is that the war is over. It's not who's taking credit. This is all very stupid, but it's what happens when you have men, old men, with big egos that put themselves above their countries. Yeah. And we'd be much better off if that wasn't the way we were led. But, I'll speak as an American. Trump, you asked about the 12 out of 10 on China. Well, I mean, he's given himself a 12 out of 10 in responding to India, Pakistan, too. And the last that I know, there isn't a 12. So that makes it a little harder.
All right, Ian Bremmer, great speaking to you as always. Thank you very much for being with us right here on NDTV. Thanks very much indeed.
My pleasure.